On an early morning in October 2019, the atmosphere at the Flagstaff Police Department in Arizona was bustling as usual with the start of a new workday. That peace was shattered by the arrival of a weathered couple, their faces etched with anxiety and desperation. They sat huddled on a waiting bench, their eyes red and raw, with dark circles from lack of sleep. They clutched each other's hands as if searching for a final ounce of comfort. They had come from a poor, rural county in New Mexico, driving nearly 150 miles through the night to be there at the crack of dawn with a single, desperate hope to report their daughter's mysterious disappearance. The officer who received them was Officer David Chen of the Criminal Investigations Division. After inviting the couple into his office and pouring them 2 glasses of warm water, he began to listen to their tearful story. The missing girl was Isabella Martinez, 20, a sophomore at Northern Arizona University School of Hotel and Restaurant Management, located in the city. According to the fragmented account of Javier Martinez, Isabella's father, the family had lost all contact with her for a week. At first, they thought she was just busy studying for exams or working on a school project. But when her academic advisor called their home to report that Isabella had missed a full week of classes without explanation, they were horrified, a terrible feeling telling them something was wrong. Isabella's mother, Maria Martinez, her voice choked with sobs, explained that their daughter was a good, thoughtful girl. Their family did not have much, and Isabella knew how hard they worked, so she studied diligently, hoping to get a stable career to help them out. She was an introvert with few friends. Outside of class, she would just go back to her dorm room and never wandered around or partied. She would never stay out overnight without calling home to ask for permission. This time, she was sure something bad had happened to her daughter. The case was immediately reported to Detective Marcus Thorne, head of the Flagstaff PD's Criminal Investigations Division. As a seasoned investigator, Detective Thorne understood that in the disappearances of young people, especially female students from out of state, every second could push the victim into greater danger. He immediately ordered a task force to be established, mobilizing his sharpest detectives. In a quick case briefing, Detective Thorne stated firmly that they had to act with extreme urgency. He instructed Detective Rios to lead one team to the NAU campus to work with the administration, the academic advisor, and Isabella's classmates and roommate. They needed to reconstruct her entire schedule and social circle for the past month. The second team, which he would lead personally, would investigate her off-campus housing and any places she frequented. The team led by Detective Emily Rios, a young but brilliant officer, quickly arrived at the university. After speaking with the administration, they went to the off-campus apartment complex where Isabella lived. Her small studio apartment, barely 160 square feet, was in a building tucked away from the main street. All her belongings were still intact, with no signs of a disturbance or forced entry. Textbooks were neatly stacked on her desk, and clothes were hung tidily in the closet. It was as if Isabella had just stepped out for a moment. The resident in the apartment across the hall provided invaluable information. She said Isabella was a sweet, hard-working person who had almost no conflicts with anyone. Isabella didn't have a boyfriend, and she had never seen her stay out late. However, one crucial detail was revealed. The neighbor stated that Isabella's family was going through a tough time recently, as a mom was seriously ill and needed a lot of money for treatment. She had seen that Isabella was very worried. About 2 weeks ago, Isabella had told her she found a part-time evening job to earn extra money to send home. She said she was working the night shift as a server at a steakhouse on the main road near campus. This was the first lead. A new job, a new environment, new relationships. The answer very likely lay there. The investigation immediately focused on this steakhouse. From the scant information, the detectives quickly identified where Isabella worked. It was Vic's Mountain Grill, a popular restaurant known for local specialties like bison burgers, located on a main thoroughfare just over a mile from Isabella's campus. The restaurant was always crowded, especially in the evenings. The following afternoon, Detective Thorne decided to go to the restaurant himself, along with Detective Rios and 2 other plainclothes detectives, posing as ordinary customers. The restaurant had not yet opened for lunch, only a few employees were cleaning up. A stout man in his 40s, with a heavy build and tan skin, came out from the kitchen. He was wearing a tank top, still holding a large ladle. Seeing the unfamiliar faces, he smiled warmly, telling them they were early and that the restaurant would open in an hour. Detective Thorne replied that they were not there to eat and displayed his badge. He identified themselves as being from the Flagstaff Police Department and asked if he was Victor Simmons, the owner. The smile on the man's face vanished. He seemed momentarily flustered but quickly composed himself. He confirmed he was Vic and asked what was going on. Detective Thorne stated they would like to ask him a few questions regarding a former employee, a Ms. Isabella Martinez. Hearing the name, Victor Simmons feigned surprise, frowning as if trying hard to remember. He asked if they meant the college kid who was working there for a little while and what had happened to her. Detective Thorne said she had been missing for a week and asked when was the last time he saw Ms. Martinez. Victor Simmons appeared thoughtful, scratching his head in a very natural gesture. He said she was a poor kid, so young and naive. He explained that she had come asking for a trial period, and he took her on because her family situation was tough. But he stated honestly that she was clumsy and awkward at the job, slow with orders, and kept breaking dishes. His place was always packed, and he needed people who were quick and sharp. So, after 1 week on trial, he had to let her go. When asked which day that was, Simmons mumbled, calculating. He then said it was the Friday night of the week before last, the 19th. She finished her shift around 11 p.m. He paid her wages in full, and she got on her bicycle and went home. He had not seen her since and figured she had probably found another job. Victor Simmons's account sounded plausible. A student with no experience failing a trial period was a perfectly normal scenario. There were no holes in his story. Detective Thorne asked to see the work areas inside the restaurant. Simmons happily complied, leading them on a tour. The restaurant was spacious and simply decorated. Everything appeared neat and clean. However, upon reaching a hidden corner near the restrooms, Detective Rios paused. She bent down and looked intently under a spare dining table. There, a patch of the concrete floor looked distinctly newer than the surrounding time-worn tiles. This patch, about 10 square feet, was a fresh color, its surface not as smooth as a professional job, clearly having been hastily refinished. Detective Thorne had also noticed this. He turned to Simmons and asked casually what happened to the floor that it needed patching up. Victor Simmons flinched, his eyes darting to the spot before quickly looking up. The confusion lasted only a split second, but it did not escape the officer's professional eyes. He gave a forced laugh and explained that the underground water pipe in that spot started leaking, making the floor damp and cracked. He had a guy break it open to fix the pipe and then patch it up. The explanation also seemed reasonable. The team asked no further questions. After officially recording Victor Simmons' statement, they left. As their car pulled away, Detective Thorne looked back at the steakhouse. Although Simmons had been cooperative and his story was consistent, he still felt something was off. The overly long frown, the too natural head scratch, and the fleeting look of panic when asked about the concrete patch left a vague suspicion in the mind of the lead investigator. He had a strong gut feeling that the answer to Isabella Martinez's disappearance was still lying within the walls of Vic's Mountain Grill. In the days that followed, the investigation hit a dead end. The detectives had re-examined all of Isabella's relationships but found no conflicts or unusual signs. The call and text history from her phone showed an abrupt halt around 10 p.m. on October 19th, matching the end of her shift. After that moment, her phone seemed to have vanished. The theory that Isabella had run away or been trafficked was also considered. A team was sent to bus stations, the train station, and border crossings to review security camera footage, but after days of painstaking work, the result was still zero. Isabella Martinez seemed to have vanished into thin air. In the CID office, the atmosphere became extremely tense. On a large whiteboard, a photo of the young student was pinned in the center, surrounded by diagrams of leads that had all gone cold. Detective Marcus Thorne stood before the board, his face pensive, rereading Victor Simmons' statement. Its very perfection made him uneasy. He had a strong professional instinct that the restaurant owner was hiding a terrible secret, but instinct wasn't evidence. During a case meeting at the end of the week, when the team was looking tired and discouraged, Detective Emily Rios voiced an idea. She reported to Detective Thorne, suggesting that all their lines of investigation were based on the assumption that the victim had left the steakhouse that night. She proposed a possibility they had not yet explored. What if she never left? Detective Rios's questions silenced the room. She continued, explaining that while Vic's Grill did not have security cameras, the two neighboring businesses, a dive bar called the Starlight Lounge and a pawn shop called Summit Pawn Loan, both had good quality cameras pointed at the street. The angles would certainly cover the entire front of Vic's Mountain Grill. She suggested they check the camera data from the night of the 19th to verify Simmons's statement about Isabella leaving around 11 p.m. If she did, they would know which direction she went. And if she did not, it would be irrefutable proof that Victor Simmons was lying, and the case would open up in a much more terrifying direction. This idea was a beam of light. Detective Thorne slammed his hand on the table, realizing this was a detail they had overlooked. He affirmed that Detective Rios was right and that this was an extremely important lead. He ordered her to take a team to those 2 addresses immediately to obtain all security camera data from October 19th and the early morning of the 20th. The order was given, and Detective Rios and 2 other detectives left immediately. Fortunately, both business owners were civic-minded and willingly cooperated, allowing the police to extract all the data from their camera hard drives. That afternoon, in the forensics lab, the tension was palpable. Detective Thorne, Detective Rios, and key investigators gathered in front of 2 large screens displaying the footage. They started with a recording from the Starlight Lounge camera, which covered almost the entire facade of Vic's Mountain Grill. They rewound the footage to 6 p.m. on October 19th. At exactly 6:30 p.m., the image of Isabella Martinez, wearing a red employee uniform and riding an old cruiser bike, appeared. She parked her bike and entered the restaurant. Throughout the evening, the footage showed that Vic's Grill was very busy, with nothing out of the ordinary. The screen fast-forwarded to around 10:30 p.m. A group of Victor Simmons's intoxicated friends began to leave. Then, the most critical detail appeared. At 10:45 p.m., Victor Simmons stepped outside alone, looked around, and forcefully pulled down the steel roll-up door, slamming the restaurant shut. The investigators held their breath, waiting for the moment Isabella would leave, as Simmons had claimed. But 1 minute, 5 minutes, then 15 minutes passed. The roll-up door remained shut. No one else emerged. Detective Thorne ordered them to keep watching. They continued to watch the entire recording until 6 a.m. the next morning. There was absolutely no image of Isabella Martinez leaving the restaurant. The roll-up door was opened only once, at 7 a.m., and the only person who came out was Victor Simmons. An eerie silence enveloped the room. Detective Thorne ordered them to check the pawn shop's camera. The second recording yielded the same result. It clearly recorded Isabella entering but not leaving. The roll-up door was pulled down at 10:45 p.m. and was not opened again until morning. The truth was painfully clear. Isabella Martinez had never left the steakhouse that night. Victor Simmons's statement was a blatant lie to cover up what happened after that door was closed. Detective Thorne shot up from his chair, his hands clenched, his eyes blazing with fury and determination. The vague suspicion had now become a certainty. Victor Simmons was very likely the key to the entire case. He barked at Detective Rios to get the county attorney's office on the line immediately. They needed an emergency search warrant. He ordered the entire CID and crime scene unit to get their gear ready, stating that this time they were tearing that place apart. That night, the lights at the police department burned bright. Detective Thorne personally worked with a prosecutor to draft the warrant application, including the crucial video clips as evidence. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, the county attorney quickly approved an emergency search warrant for Vic's Mountain Grill and Victor Simmons's private residence. Meanwhile, a formidable force was mobilized. The entire CID was summoned. The crime scene unit prepared specialized equipment, including UV lights and chemical test kits like luminol. A medical examiner was put on standby. To ensure security, a fully equipped SWAT team was also dispatched. At 5 a.m. on October 28, 2019, while the city was still asleep, the task force's convoy silently departed. They used no sirens, only the quiet flashing of red and blue lights. The convoy stopped about 200 yards from the restaurant. SWAT officers quickly disembarked and covertly surrounded the area, sealing every exit. Detective Thorne, Detective Rios, the investigators, and the prosecutor walked to the front door. Victor Simmons lived on the second floor. Detective Thorne pounded on the steel roll-up door. The harsh, metallic sound echoed in the early morning silence. After a few more bangs, a light turned on upstairs. Victor Simmons appeared on the balcony, his face sleepy and irritated, asking who was banging on the door so early. But when he looked down and saw the large contingent of police, the irritation on his face turned to horror. His face went pale. Detective Thorne held up the search warrant, his voice clear and authoritative. He identified himself and stated they had a warrant to search his residence and business as part of the investigation into Isabella Martinez's disappearance. He demanded that Simmons open the door immediately and cooperate. Victor Simmons stood frozen. He knew it was over. A moment later, he stumbled back inside. The clatter of a lock was heard, and the roll-up door was slowly raised. The moment the door opened, 2 detectives rushed in and subdued Victor Simmons. He offered no resistance and was moved to a corner under the watch of 2 officers. The search was conducted comprehensively. The crime scene unit, led by CSU Officer Ken Tanaka, took the lead. They split into teams, each responsible for a specific area. First, they conducted a visual sweep, looking for any unusual signs. The dining area, kitchen, storage room, and Simmons's private bedroom were meticulously examined. Then, more advanced forensic techniques were applied. One team used UV lights to scan all surfaces for bodily fluids. Another team sprayed luminol in suspicious areas to reveal any hidden bloodstains. However, after nearly 2 hours, these methods yielded no results. This indicated that either no bloody struggle had occurred or the perpetrator had been exceptionally thorough in cleaning up. They checked every closet, under the beds, and even inside large barrels, but found nothing. When initial search avenues proved fruitless, attention shifted to body disposal. The water tank on the roof was checked. The drainage system and grease traps were opened. A specialized team was called in to pump out and inspect the septic system. It was grueling work, but again, the result was disappointment. No trace of Isabella Martinez was found. The search seemed to have hit another dead end. Victor Simmons, though under watch, sensed it. A flicker of hope appeared in his eyes. Just then, Detective Rios approached Detective Thorne and silently pointed toward the corner of the restaurant, where the table still covered the suspicious patch of concrete. It was the last hope. Detective Thorne nodded and ordered 2 SWAT officers to move the table. The rectangular patch of fresh, grey concrete was now fully exposed. CSU Officer Tanaka put on gloves and knelt to examine it. He tapped lightly on the surface with a small hammer. The sound was dull and dense, not like solid concrete. He used a metal drill bit to gently bore into a corner. The bit went in with surprising ease. Officer Tanaka looked up and reported that the layer of concrete was very thin, only about 2 to 3 inches. The structure underneath was very loose, with clear signs of digging and refilling. It was all too clear. All eyes turned to Victor Simmons. The large man was now trembling, sweat soaking his face. Detective Marcus Thorne slowly walked toward him. He crouched down to face the suspect, his eyes as sharp as a razor. He said in a low voice that carried immense weight that they had given him a chance, but he had refused it. He asked him one last time what was under the concrete. Victor Simmons opened his mouth but couldn't make a sound. He could only shake his head hopelessly. Seeing the suspect's defiance, Detective Thorne stood up and turned to the waiting officers. His voice rang out, firm and irrevocable. "Break it open." Detective Marcus Thorne's harsh, decisive order shattered the suffocating silence. 2 SWAT officers, armed with a sledgehammer and a pry bar, moved into position. Victor Simmons, now held firmly by 2 officers, let out a desperate scream, begging them not to break it. But his pleas came too late. The first blow from the sledgehammer landed with a deafening noise, fracturing the thin layer of cement. After just a few more strikes, the entire concrete patch was shattered. As the broken concrete was cleared away, a thick, nauseating stench, the unmistakable smell of decomposition, erupted, assaulting the nostrils of everyone present. It was a horrific smell of death. When Victor Simmons smelled the familiar odor, he completely broke down. He collapsed onto the floor, his body racked with violent tremors, his eyes wide with horror. He knew the demon he had painstakingly buried had now been dragged into the light. Detective Thorne commanded everyone without a specific task to get outside. The CSU and medical examiner got into position. The exhumation began immediately. The crime scene unit carefully used small trowels to remove the earth layer by layer. When a layer of soil about 8 inches deep was removed, a corner of a blue plastic top began to show. They continued to dig with caution. Soon, a human-shaped object, tightly wrapped in multiple layers of top and old blankets, was fully revealed. It was in a fetal position within a shallow hole. The medical examiner carefully cut the ropes and unwrapped the layers. When the final layer was opened, despite having prepared themselves mentally, everyone was stunned. Inside was the body of a woman in an advanced state of decomposition. Her face was unrecognizable, but the faded, tattered red restaurant uniform was unmistakable. It was Isabella Martinez. A mournful silence fell over the scene. After a moment, the work resumed with intense focus. The medical examiner began a preliminary on-site examination. He announced that the deceased was a female, age range 18 to 22, height approximately 5 feet 3 inches. The body was in a fetal position, with signs of being bound at the hands and feet. The estimated time of death was under 1 month, consistent with when the victim went missing. He carefully examined the neck area and noted that although decomposed, there were signs of a fractured hyoid bone. He stated that it was highly probable the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation, specifically strangulation. The examination continued, revealing multiple contusions on the body, indicating a very violent struggle before death. Every one of the medical examiner's findings was a damning indictment of the killer's brutal actions. Meanwhile, the CSU team collected crucial evidence from the burial pit, including a torn-off button, a hair clip, and the victim's sandals. The on-site examination lasted for over 2 hours. Once completed, Isabella Martinez's body was placed in a specialized body bag. The moment officers solemnly carried the black bag out of the restaurant, past the hundreds of onlookers, many people couldn't hold back their tears. Victor Simmons was escorted to a police car amidst the fury and curses of the crowd. He no longer dared to lift his head. He knew his life had ended the moment that first sledgehammer blow struck the concrete. In an interrogation room at the Flagstaff Police Department, Victor Simmons no longer maintained his defiant demeanor. Faced with Detective Marcus Thorne and irrefutable evidence, he began to confess. However, even at this moment, his deceitful nature had not entirely disappeared. He decided to confess to a half-truth, a story fabricated to mitigate his crime. He admitted he killed her but claimed it was an accident. When asked to explain, Simmons recounted that after his friends left, he went to check the cash register and found nearly $300 missing. At that time, only Isabella was left. He asked her, but she denied it. They argued, and in the heat of the moment, he got angry and slapped her a few times. She fell and hit her head on the edge of a table and died before he knew it. He was so scared that he had to bury the body to hide it. The story was constructed plausibly, turning a deliberate murder into manslaughter. But Detective Thorne felt something was wrong. The fractured hyoid bone was not the result of a fall, and the violent struggle did not fit with a simple altercation. Behind this confession was certainly another, more horrifying truth. Detective Thorne asked if that was the whole truth. Simmons hastily nodded yes. Detective Thorne didn't press further. He knew that to break this final lie, he needed irrefutable scientific evidence from the autopsy. He ordered an officer to record Simmons's statement and have him sign it. Procedurally, they now had a confession to murder. The next day, the detailed autopsy results were sent to the task force. The report confirmed the initial findings. The victim died of mechanical asphyxiation due to strangulation and showed signs of a struggle. But most importantly, there was a discovery at the end of the report. Semen was found in the victim's vaginal cavity. DNA analysis showed that this sample was a match to the DNA of the subject, Victor Simmons. Detective Thorne held the report in his hand, his teeth clenched tightly. He knew. Behind this murder was an even more heinous crime. Victor Simmons had not only murdered the young woman, but before that, he had raped her. The real motive wasn't money. The real motive was depraved lust. He stood up, took the lab report, and walked straight toward the interrogation room where Victor Simmons was being held. It was time to rip off the final mask of this monster. The next day, in an interrogation room, the air was heavy. Victor Simmons was escorted in. Compared to the previous day, he looked calmer, perhaps believing his story of manslaughter would save him from the harshest sentence. Detective Marcus Thorne sat opposite him, his face devoid of emotion. Beside him was Detective Rios, pen and paper ready. Detective Thorne began, his voice flat, asking Simmons to tell him again, in detail, what happened on the night of October 19th. Victor Simmons began to perform the play he had scripted. He spoke of discovering the missing money, the confrontation, the argument, and the scuffle. He tried to portray his anger as genuinely as possible, recounting Isabella falling and going limp. He ended his story with a tone full of fake remorse, insisting he did not mean to do it and had panicked. Detective Thorne listened patiently without interruption. When Simmons finished, he just stared at him in silence. The deep, quiet gaze made Victor Simmons uneasy. He swallowed hard, avoiding the detective's eyes. Detective Thorne finally spoke, his voice as cold as ice. He called it a fairly elaborate story that explained why he had to bury the body, but said it did not explain other things. With that, he took the detailed forensic report from his folder and placed it on the table. He stated that Simmons had claimed the victim died from hitting her head, but the autopsy report showed no signs of trauma to her skull. He asked how Simmons could explain that. Victor Simmons froze, stammering about how that was not possible, that she had definitely fallen. Detective Thorne interrupted, confirming she did fall. The ME had found fractures on 2 of her left ribs, consistent with a hard shove, but that was not what killed her. He then asked if Simmons wanted to know the real cause of death. Simmons did not answer. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. Detective Thorne stated that the cause of death for Isabella Martinez was mechanical asphyxiation, specifically strangulation. The autopsy showed a fractured hyoid bone, which could only be caused by an extremely powerful, sustained constricting force. This was not an accident, he said. This was a deliberate act of murder. Victor Simmons's face went white. He began to tremble. His first lie had been irrefutably debunked. Detective Thorne continued, his voice growing even colder. He said that the story about the motive, about the victim stealing money, was also a blatant lie, because they had found the real, much more depraved motive. He flipped open the report and read aloud, clearly enunciating every word. Forensic Examination Report number 1245. Autopsy Findings, Biological Evidence Section. Excerpt. Semen was found in the vaginal cavity of the victim, Isabella Martinez. DNA analysis was conducted. Results indicate that the semen sample contains a genetic profile that matches the genetic profile from the blood sample of the subject, Victor Simmons. The probability of a match is 99.99%. Detective Thorne finished reading, closed the report, and placed it on the table. He leaned back, silently watching Victor Simmons. The only sounds in the room now were the gasps and chattering of the restaurant owner's teeth. The scientific evidence had delivered a fatal blow, shattering his final mask. All denials were now meaningless. Victor Simmons slumped forward, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking violently. He began to sob, not with fake tears, but with the cries of a cornered beast who knew he would never see the light of day again. After a long while, he looked up, his eyes bloodshot and filled with despair. He said he would talk, that he would tell them everything. And so, the final, most horrific truth about that fateful night was told. This time, Victor Simmons's confession was a coherent story of depravity, fueled by alcohol and lust. He admitted he had been drinking heavily with his friends. After seeing them off, the alcohol caused his lust to surge uncontrollably. At that moment, only he and Isabella Martinez were left in the restaurant. The image of the beautiful young student quietly cleaning up became an irresistible target. He pulled down the roll-up door and locked it, then used brute force to assault her. Isabella fought back with all her might. She scratched, bit, and screamed. Her screams terrified Simmons, afraid the neighbors would hear. In a fit of animalistic rage, he clamped his hands around her throat and squeezed until she stopped breathing. After satisfying his lust, his drunkenness faded. Seeing Isabella's naked body on the floor, Simmons was jolted back to reality. Extreme fear replaced his lust. He had killed someone. The rest of the story matched what the task force had deduced. He panicked and tried to dispose of the body. He initially thought of dumping it in the river but abandoned the plan when he saw the security cameras from neighboring businesses. Then, the insane idea of burying the body inside the restaurant came to him. He carried out the plan coldly and calculatedly, from digging the hole and burying the body to patching the concrete and fabricating a perfect story. The final confession was completed and signed. Victor Simmons had admitted to rape and murder. The case was essentially solved. The investigative work of the Flagstaff PD's CID had come to an end. But for Detective Thorne and his colleagues, this victory brought no joy, only a profound sense of sorrow. That afternoon, in the task force briefing room, Detective Thorne stood before the whiteboard. He took down Isabella Martinez's photo and carefully placed it in the case file. Then he turned to his colleagues, their faces etched with fatigue. He said in a low voice that the confession was complete and the evidence was solid. But to make the case file absolutely ironclad, they needed to perform one last procedural step. He ordered them to prepare a plan for the crime scene reconstruction the next morning, so Simmons would have to reenact his entire crime. After that, they would finalize the file and send it to the county attorney for prosecution. At 7 a.m. on October 30th, 2019, the atmosphere at the Coconino County Jail was tense. It was the day of the crime scene reconstruction. Victor Simmons was brought out of his cell. After a night confronting his own monstrous crimes, he looked haggard and completely broken. A large convoy was ready. The force included the task force, representatives from the county attorney's office, a court-appointed defense attorney, and a large contingent of SWAT officers to provide security, as news of the discovery had sparked extreme public outrage. When the convoy arrived at Vic's Mountain Grill, a chaotic scene unfolded. Hundreds of onlookers and news reporters were crowded behind a security perimeter. SWAT officers worked hard to maintain order. Victor Simmons was escorted from the vehicle. He was dressed in an inmate jumpsuit, his head bowed. Shouts and curses rained down from the crowd. Animal. A life for a life. Give that girl back to her parents. Simmons shrank back, stumbling. The reconstruction was conducted inside the restaurant. The roll-up door was closed to isolate them. The pit in the floor was still there, a gaping wound that would never heal. Detective Thorne began, his voice echoing clearly. Defendant Victor Simmons, you will now reenact your entire criminal act from the night of October 19, 2019. You are required to perform these actions exactly as you have described them in your confession. A female detective of similar build to Isabella Martinez was assigned to play the victim in the non-violent parts, while a mannequin was used for the rest. Under camera lenses and the strict supervision of the prosecutor, Victor Simmons began to reenact the nightmare. He reenacted sitting and drinking, seeing his friends off, and then pulling the door shut. When asked to reenact the sexual assault, he trembled, dropped to his knees, and sobbed that he could not do it. Detective Thorne said in a voice without compromise that this was his responsibility. He committed the crime, so he had the responsibility to reenact it for justice. He ordered him to continue. Victor Simmons was forced to continue, performing his brutish acts with the mannequin. He reenacted the struggle and the victim's fierce resistance. Then came the most brutal part, clamping his hands around the victim's neck. Even though it was just a reenactment, the act made everyone present shudder. Afterward, he had to reenact the entire concealment process. He pointed to where he had gotten the tools, then acted out breaking the floor and digging. He showed how he had wrapped the body and placed it in the hole, and finally, patching the cement. Throughout the process, he wept and wailed. Having to personally reenact the entire horrifying crime at the scene was an incredibly severe form of psychological punishment. At 12 p.m., the crime scene reconstruction concluded. Every criminal act had been reenacted in clear detail, fully recorded. The results were completely consistent with his confession and the autopsy findings. Returning to headquarters, the task force worked without rest. Based on all the evidence, the Flagstaff Police Department completed its final investigation report. The report, over 100 pages long, provided a detailed analysis, affirming that Victor Simmons's actions constituted rape and first-degree murder, with aggravating factors such as extreme cruelty and savagery. On November 15, 2019, the entire case file was transferred to the Coconino County Attorney's Office with a recommendation to prosecute Victor Simmons to the fullest extent of the law. At the County Attorney's Office, prosecutors again meticulously studied the file. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. After 2 weeks, the Coconino County Attorney's Office issued an indictment, charging Victor Simmons with rape and first-degree murder under the relevant articles of the Arizona Revised Statutes. The indictment was a judgment on paper, a voice demanding justice for the deceased. The case file was then transferred to the Coconino County Superior Court for trial. The final legal procedures were expedited. The defense attorney was given the opportunity to meet with the defendant. The victim's family was also notified of the trial date. In the county jail, the days of waiting were the longest and heaviest for Victor Simmons. He became sullen and withdrawn, knowing there was no way out. Finally, nearly 3 months after the crime was brought to light, the court summons was sent. The indictment was served. The final day of judgment for the demonic restaurant owner was set. On December 15, 2019, the Coconino County Superior Court opened the trial of Victor Simmons. The trial drew intense public interest. Hundreds of people gathered outside the courthouse, carrying signs demanding the harshest sentence. Security was at a maximum. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with silence and sorrow. On the bench for the victim's family, Javier and Maria Martinez sat silently, clutching a portrait of their daughter. Their faces were gaunt. At 9 a.m., the judge entered and declared the trial open. The defendant, Victor Simmons, was escorted to the defendant's table. The once burly restaurant owner was now just a pathetic criminal in an inmate's jumpsuit, his head bowed. The representative from the county attorney's office stood and read the indictment, starkly laying bare the entire criminal process of Victor Simmons. The courtroom was plunged into a breathless silence. In the gallery, Maria broke into sobs. The trial moved to the examination phase. Facing the court, Victor Simmons no longer tried to prevaricate. He tremblingly admitted to all criminal acts as stated in the indictment. Through tears, he said he was not human anymore. He had destroyed her life, caused so much pain to her family, and buried his own. He deserved to die. He bowed his head, pleaded guilty, and said he was sorry to the spirit of Bella and her parents, and that he would accept any punishment. Simmons's confession did not lessen the outrage. The trial moved to closing arguments. The prosecutor delivered a powerful, hour-long statement, analyzing the nature and dangerousness of the crime and emphasizing the defendant's moral decay. The prosecutor stressed that the defendant's actions were exceptionally savage and cruel. He simultaneously violated the two most important subjects protected by law, a person's dignity and their life. He not only took the life of a young woman with so many dreams ahead of her, but also brutally trampled on her dignity. After the crime, the defendant showed no intention of surrendering, but instead made calculated plans to conceal his crime. These actions showed that the defendant was beyond rehabilitation and needed to be permanently removed from society. The prosecutor recommended the court sentence Victor Simmons to the maximum penalty for both crimes, the death penalty for murder and a life sentence for rape, with the ultimate sentence being death. The defense attorney, knowing his client could hardly escape a severe sentence, still tried to present mitigating factors, such as his sincere confession and cooperation with law enforcement. The lawyer asked the court to consider giving the defendant a chance to live and atone for his mistakes. When given the chance for a final statement, Victor Simmons could only weep. He turned toward the victim's family and dropped to his knees. He was sorry, so sorry. He begged them to forgive him. He deserved to die. He could not form complete sentences, only choked sobs of despair. After deliberation, the court delivered its final verdict. The presiding judge, in a voice filled with steel, declared that the defendant's actions were exceptionally savage and cruel, trampling on the most basic moral and human values of society. He stated that the defendant not only violated the body, dignity, and life of the victim, but also caused unbearable pain and loss to her family. Such actions must be punished with the most severe sentence. The court found the defendant, Victor Simmons, guilty of rape and first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for the crime of rape and death for the crime of murder. The ultimate penalty to be carried out was death. As for civil liability, the defendant was ordered to pay for all funeral expenses and compensation for emotional distress to the victim's family. The verdict was announced amidst the heartbreaking sobs of Isabella Martinez's parents. Justice had finally been served. Upon hearing the sentence, Victor Simmons's legs gave out, and he collapsed. Two bailiffs had to half carry, half drag him away. The case closed. Vic's Mountain Grill was sealed and later demolished, becoming a vacant lot haunted by the memory of the crime. Isabella Martinez's parents returned to New Mexico with their daughter's portrait and a pain that would follow them for the rest of their lives. They had found justice for their daughter, but they could never get her back. This case shows how terrifyingly thin the line between a man and a monster can be. Because of one drunken night and unrestrained lust, an ordinary person turned into a vicious demon. It shows how, when morality is eclipsed by animalistic urges, a person can do things of unspeakable cruelty. The case will forever remain a scar, a horrifying lesson about the degradation of a human being, and a reminder that no crime, no matter how cleverly concealed, can escape the long arm of justice.